Alrighty guys, so today I'm going to explain to you how to pick your arrow length for a compound bow, because it is pretty important with a compound bow to get the right length, okay, and the right spine. But let me just say, this is not for a recurve bow, this is just for a compound bow. And if you are a recurve shooter, check out NU Sensei's channel. He's got lots of great videos on how to pick recurve stuff and just about everything on anything to do with recurve stuff. NU Sensei's got a video on it, and he's a great guy too. So getting onto it, this is a redo of my last video because the last video got complained about compound arrow lengths. Now, first thing I want to say, it is very dangerous just to pick arrows on length. If you pick an arrow on length and it's underspined, man, it can go wrong. And what happens, of course, compound bows push so hard on the arrow, they flex harder. And a compound bow, okay, so when the pressure from a recurve bow is greatest at its max, at the max draw, and then decreases as the string gets closer to the riser. With a compound bow, the closer the string gets to the riser, the harder it pushes. So that means it is way more important that you have correct spine with your arrows with a compound bow, because it's pushing on that arrow harder for a longer period of time, making that arrow bend more. Now, if you get a wrong spined arrow that is way too underweak, when it goes, just keeps going and then boom, explodes mid-draw, and the fragments will go straight through your bow hand. And just to prove it, I'll put some pictures up here. Okay, so there's going to be a couple of dangerous pictures. If you don't like gruesome looking pictures, look away now. So that is the dangers of picking the wrong spined arrow. Now, if you go, oh yeah, I'm 28 inches, give me any 28-inch arrow, you're going to end up blowing an arrow through your hand. So be careful about that. That is one major thing you have to be careful about, making sure you get the right arrows for your compound bow. The next little thing I'm going to talk about is how to get that length for your compound bow now. So there's a few different options and a few different ways of picking that bow length. If you can see it in there, my rest is in line with my burger hole. So how I pick my arrow length is to make sure that my arrow can still sit on my blade at full draw. Okay, if it's sticking out here, I know it's too long. If I draw it back and it's going to come behind the rest, I know it's too short. But what you can do is use an overdraw rest, and the overdraw rest is going to bring your blade back to here. So that means now I could get it so my arrow can sit here on the blade. So that means I can use a lot shorter arrow. So that means my arrow can sit here instead of here. It can sit back here. Now, a little thing about buying arrows. Okay, so the main factor to the cost of an arrow is how straight it is. So how straight the arrow is how expensive that arrow is. Now, if you're buying, say, X10s that are like $600 or $700 a set, you want to get them as straight as possible. And the longer an arrow, the more chance it's going to have a little factory defect in it. So even though it's tolerance to that tolerance, it still could have a tiny little variance at either end of the bow. At either end of the arrow, sorry. So to help that is to shoot the shortest arrow possible. The shorter the arrow, the less chance you have of getting a factory defect in it. So that's the point of shooting an over rest. Okay, so once you know how far you can draw the arrow back without it falling off your rest, so that's the only thing you have to worry about, is if the arrow is still on your rest at full draw, that is the correct arrow length. So now you have the arrow length. So say it could be 28.5 with a normal rest, or say you use an overdraw rest, it could be 27 inches. So you could get an extra 1.5 inches shorter with an overdraw rest. And I shoot both these arrows out of a 60-pound bow. That's fine. That is, they both spine correctly and they both group just as good as each other, even though they are at totally different lengths. Now, once you have your arrow length, then you need to find an arrow chart, and it all depends on the spine of the arrow. Everything to do with arrows revolves around the spine, because that's what's going to stop them from blowing up. If the spine's too weak, they will definitely blow up and shoot through your hand. If they're too stiff, you're going to be safe, and they're just going to shoot high right if anything, with no bare shafting. So you'll use your bare shaft to work out your spine after that too, and we'll go over that in another video. So once you get your arrow length, then you need to find what company you're going to buy, and then you get the arrow length. So I'll put up a spine chart here, and what you're going to do, you're going to go down one side, and then along the top. So 28 inches here, the 60 pound bow here, and then you're going to meet in the middle, and that's what the spinage of your arrow is going to be. Okay, so we know this is 27 inches, so we go to the 27 inch mark on the table, come across to 60 pounds, and that'll tell you your perfect spinage. And that's the only way you should pick an arrow, is with that spine chart. Now let me tell you, every company has a different spine chart. Just because this Nano XR from Carbon Express is a 530 doesn't mean it's going to be the same as this gold tip Pierce at 530. So I don't know why, but all different bow companies have a different spine chart. So you need to you need to look at the spine chart for each exact arrow, otherwise they're going to be totally different. And I have a good mate, Gary, he talks about this a lot, and he really notices the difference between, say, two 500 spined arrows. And he knows a lot about archery too, Gary. So that's a little bit about how to get your spinage and your correct arrow length. Now, a little bit about okay, so there's one little thing that variates this tiny a bit. Okay, so if you now have over a 30-inch draw length, it means that your string is pushing on that arrow longer than, say, a 26-inch draw. So if you've got a 26-inch draw, it means you're pushing on the arrow, the bow is pushing power into the arrow for this much distance, say. If you've got a 30-inch draw, it means it's now pushing on the arrow for that long. If that makes sense, that's why you need a longer draw length is a lot more velocity, and that is why, because it's pushing on the arrow for a longer amount of time. Now if you have a draw length over 30 inches, you need to put 5 pounds on your bow. So when I go to that spine chart now, if my draw length says 31 inches, go down to 31 and I'm shooting a 60 pound bow, it means I go to a 65 pound bow now, and then match those two up. Okay, so now that's a little thing about if you've got a really long draw length, you need to go a little bit stiffer on the spine just to equal that extra velocity of the pushing of the arrow. So that's about it for today. I think I've got everything covered. I think I've talked about everything. The dangers of an overdraw rest. Now let me tell you about the overdraw rest. The only danger is if you're using an overdraw rest, the arrow can come back that far, that's now over the top of your hand, so you have to be careful if you've got a bumpy thing. But I've got a video about that on how dangerous the overdraw rests are, and talking about that, and maybe I'll link it up here, or I'll put it somewhere. Alright guys, so make sure if you like this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit all the other buttons, and I'll see you again soon for another video.